The richest man in the city begged me not to leave him. Tears streaming down his face, he offered me everything: his fortune, his companies, even his soul. But I'd already decided. In 30 days, I'd gone from his biggest secret to his greatest nightmare. Here's how love became my weapon. Before I tell you how I brought down a billionaire empire with nothing but truth and determination, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. This story will change how you see power forever. My name is Maya, and 6 months ago, I was just another face in the crowd of downtown Chicago. Every morning at 5:30, I'd wake up in my tiny studio apartment, the one with the broken heater and the neighbor who played music too loud. I was 28, drowning in student loans that felt like chains around my ankles, and working 2 jobs just to keep my head above water. During the day, I analyzed market trends for Henderson Financial, a mid-tier firm where I was the only Black woman in the entire finance department. At night, I bartended at an upscale restaurant, serving drinks to people who made more in a month than I made in a year. I had dreams bigger than my circumstances. I wanted to break into high finance, to sit in those glass conference rooms where real decisions were made, where millions moved with a single handshake. But every door I knocked on seemed to have an invisible sign that read, "Not for people like you." My supervisors would smile and nod when I presented brilliant analysis. Then, somehow, my ideas would end up in their presentations with their names attached. I watched less qualified colleagues get promoted, while I was told I needed more experience, more education, more everything except what I actually needed, to be seen as worthy. The worst part wasn't even the rejection. It was the way they looked right through me, like I was furniture in the room. During meetings, I'd speak up with insights that could save the company thousands, only to have someone repeat my exact words 5 minutes later and get praised for their brilliant thinking. I started keeping detailed notes of everything, documenting each time my contributions were overlooked or stolen. I told myself one day it would matter. One day I'd prove my worth to people who refused to see it. It was a Tuesday morning in March when everything changed. I was grabbing my usual coffee from Bean There, a little shop 2 blocks from my office, when this man practically crashed through the door. He was wearing sunglasses indoors, a baseball cap pulled low, and he kept looking over his shoulder like someone was chasing him. Most people would have minded their own business, but something about his energy made me curious. He was clearly stressed, fumbling with his wallet and dropping coins all over the floor. Without thinking, I bent down to help him collect his change. When our eyes met as I handed him the quarters, I saw something unexpected, genuine gratitude, not the entitled expectation I was used to from wealthy-looking men. He had these incredibly intense brown eyes, the kind that seemed to see everything at once. "Thank you," he said, and his voice was deeper than I expected, with just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. "I'm having one of those mornings where everything feels like it's falling apart." We ended up sitting together at a corner table, and what started as small talk quickly became the most engaging conversation I'd had in months. He told me his name was Alex and that he worked in tech. When I mentioned I was in finance, his whole demeanor shifted. He started asking me questions about market predictions, about emerging technologies, about the intersection of innovation and investment. I found myself talking faster than usual, excited to finally have someone who seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts. Then, I made a casual comment about how certain tech companies were overvalued because they prioritize flashy features over sustainable business models. I mentioned one company specifically, Kane Industries, and how their recent expansion into artificial intelligence seemed more like a publicity stunt than a real strategy. The moment I said it, his face went completely still. "What makes you think that?" he asked, leaning forward with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. For the next hour, I broke down exactly why Kane Industries was heading for trouble, using public financial data and market trends that anyone could access if they knew where to look. When I finished my analysis, Alex was staring at me like I'd just solved world hunger. "That's the most insightful breakdown of that company I've ever heard," he said quietly. "And I've heard a lot of people talk about Kane Industries." Before I could ask what he meant by that, he was pulling out his phone. "Can I get your number? I'd love to continue this conversation sometime when I'm not running from—" He paused. He paused, glancing toward the window. "When I have more time to really talk." What followed was the most intoxicating month of my life. Alex would text me at random hours with questions about everything from cryptocurrency to behavioral economics. Our conversations flowed like water, jumping from serious business discussions to silly debates about the best pizza toppings. He had this way of listening that made me feel like I was the only person in the world, like every word I said mattered to him. Our first real date was at a tiny Italian restaurant in Little Italy, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and candles melted down to nothing. He showed up in jeans and a simple black sweater, looking nothing like the polished businessmen I was used to encountering in my work life. Over pasta and wine, he told me about growing up poor, about building his first computer from spare parts he found in dumpsters, about the loneliness that came with success. I shared my dreams of breaking barriers in finance, my frustration with being constantly underestimated, my fear that I wasn't good enough for the life I wanted. There was something magnetic about the way he challenged my thinking. When I'd express doubt about my abilities, he'd counter with specific examples of my brilliance from our conversations. "You see patterns other people miss," he told me one night as we walked along the lakefront. "You think 3 steps ahead, while everyone else is still figuring out step 1. That's not luck or coincidence, that's pure talent." For the first time in years, I felt truly seen by someone who seemed to understand both my ambition and my struggles. The physical attraction was undeniable, but it was the emotional intimacy that really got to me. He'd call late at night just to hear about my day, remembering details about coworkers who gave me trouble or projects I was excited about. When I mentioned I'd never been to a jazz club, he took me to Green Mill, where we sat in a dark corner booth, and he whispered explanations of different musical techniques in my ear. When I caught a cold and couldn't stop coughing during a phone call, he showed up at my apartment an hour later with soup from my favorite Thai place and stayed to watch movies until I fell asleep. But it was during our 4th week of dating that everything shifted. We were at his apartment, which I now realize should have been my first clue, since it was a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. When his phone started buzzing non-stop, he kept declining calls, but whoever it was wouldn't give up. Finally, he answered with an irritated, "What is it, Monica?" and walked into the other room. I could hear fragments of the conversation: board meeting, stock prices, Mr. Kane. When he came back, his face was pale. "Maya," he said slowly, sitting down across from me, "there's something I need to tell you about who I really am." The moment he said, "I'm Adrian Kane," my entire world tilted sideways. This wasn't just any successful businessman. This was the Adrian Kane, founder of Kane Industries, worth somewhere around $8 billion according to Forbes. The same company I'd been casually critiquing over coffee was his baby, his empire, his life's work. And here I was, sitting in his living room in my Target jeans, having just told him his business strategy was fundamentally flawed. My first instinct was to run. What was someone like me doing with someone like him? But Adrian grabbed my hand before I could stand up, his eyes pleading. "Please don't leave," he said. "For the first time in years, someone sees me as just a person. Not a bank account, not a business opportunity, just me." The vulnerability in his voice melted my defenses, and against every rational thought in my head, I stayed. What followed was like stepping into a movie I never thought I'd be cast in. Private jets became as normal as catching the bus. He'd text me at noon saying, "Want to see the sunset from Napa?" And by evening, we'd be walking through vineyards with glasses of wine that cost more than my monthly rent. Michelin-starred restaurants, Broadway shows, weekend trips to Paris. It was intoxicating and overwhelming all at once. But it was the smaller moments that really got to me. The way he'd listen to me talk about market trends, like I was revealing the secrets of the universe. How he'd ask my opinion on business decisions, genuinely valuing my insight. For someone who'd spent years being overlooked, having one of the most powerful men in the world hang on my every word was addictive. The first crack in the fairy tale came 3 weeks into knowing his real identity. We were at some exclusive charity gala, the kind where a single table costs $50,000 and everyone pretends to care about causes while networking for their next big deal. Adrian introduced me to his inner circle, and I immediately felt the shift in temperature. These people smiled with their mouths but not their eyes, offering polite handshakes while their gazes lingered just long enough to make me uncomfortable. "So you're Adrian's latest project," said Catherine, the wife of his business partner. She said it with a sweet smile that didn't match the ice in her voice. When I corrected her, explaining I was a financial analyst, she laughed. "Oh, honey, that's adorable. Adrian does love his charity cases." The conversation moved on before I could respond, but those words stuck in my chest like thorns. That same night, I overheard a conversation between Adrian and his board members about a factory closure in Vietnam. They were laughing about how they'd saved millions by moving production to an even cheaper location, joking about the workers they'd left unemployed. "It's just business," one of them said. "These people should be grateful we gave them jobs in the first place." When I brought it up to Adrian later, he brushed off my concerns. "You don't understand how complicated international business is," he said dismissively. The pattern continued. Casual racist comments disguised as jokes, discussions about keeping certain neighborhoods exclusive, board meetings where diversity initiatives were dismissed as political correctness gone too far. Each time I voiced discomfort, Adrian would minimize my feelings or change the subject. I started to realize that in his world, I wasn't just different, I was decoration. The end came on a Sunday dinner at his parents' estate in Lake Forest. I should have known what I was walking into when Adrian spent the entire car ride coaching me on what topics to avoid. "Don't mention your student loans," he said, "and maybe don't talk about your bartending job. They're very traditional." Traditional. That was his code word for a lot of things I was beginning to understand. His mother, Patricia, greeted me with the kind of smile you give to someone's pet. "Oh, you're much prettier than I expected," she said, as if Adrian had prepared her for disappointment. His father, William, barely acknowledged my presence beyond a weak handshake and a grunt. Dinner was 3 hours of barely concealed hostility wrapped in passive-aggressive politeness. They asked where I came from, as if I were an exotic artifact. When I mentioned my finance background, Patricia laughed. "How nice that you have hobbies." The breaking point came when William started talking about the problem with affirmative action and how it was lowering standards everywhere. I felt Adrian tense beside me, but he said nothing. Nothing. When I tried to engage respectfully, presenting actual data about diversity improving business outcomes, William waved me off. "Well, you would say that, wouldn't you?" The room fell silent. Adrian stared at his plate, and I realized with crystal clarity that I was completely alone at that table. But the real knife came 2 days later, when I saw the engagement announcement in the Chicago Tribune. There was Adrian, smiling beside Victoria Ashworth, a blonde socialite whose family owned half the North Shore. The article mentioned their long courtship and included quotes about their shared values and similar backgrounds. I stared at that photo for 20 minutes, my coffee growing cold, understanding finally that I had never been anything more than his secret entertainment. When I confronted him that evening, he didn't even try to deny it. "You have to understand," he said, pacing his living room like a caged animal. Marriage is different for people like me. It's about combining families, creating dynasties. Victoria and I, we make sense on paper. When I asked what I had been to him, he had the audacity to look hurt. You were real, Maya. You were the one person who saw me for who I really am. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had seen him clearly, and that was exactly the problem. Walking out of Adrian's penthouse that night, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, burning in my chest like acid, but underneath it was something harder, colder. Determination. He had underestimated me from the beginning, seeing me as entertainment rather than a threat. That would be his first mistake. His second was assuming I'd disappear quietly into the night, like some forgettable chapter in his privileged life. I had spent 2 months in his world, and he had no idea how much I'd absorbed. Every dinner conversation about offshore accounts, every casual mention of regulatory loopholes, every bragging session about creative accounting, I had listened to it all with the trained ear of a financial analyst. While he thought I was just his pretty companion, I was building a mental database of his empire's vulnerabilities. The first thing I did was start documenting everything I could remember. Names, dates, figures, illegal practices casually discussed over wine. I had photos on my phone from company events, screenshots of texts where Adrian complained about bleeding heart labor laws, voicemails where he bragged about tax avoidance strategies. What had seemed like pillow talk was actually a confession booth, and I had been taking notes the entire time. But I needed more than memories and casual evidence. I needed proof that would stand up to scrutiny, documentation that even his army of lawyers couldn't dismiss. So I reached out to someone I never thought I'd contact again, my college roommate Jessica, who now worked as an investigative journalist for the Chicago Sun-Times. I have a story for you, I told her over coffee, but you're going to need to verify everything I tell you, because the person involved has enough money to buy silence. Jessica introduced me to a network I never knew existed. Investigative journalists, labor rights activists, federal investigators who had been watching companies like Kane Industries for years, waiting for someone with inside access to come forward. Turns out, I wasn't the first person to notice Adrian's questionable practices, but I was the first with detailed first-hand knowledge and evidence. Day one started with a leaked document about Kane Industries' tax structure mysteriously appearing in the inbox of every major financial reporter in the country. The story broke on a Tuesday morning, revealing a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts that had helped Adrian avoid paying hundreds of millions in federal taxes. His stock price dropped 8% before lunch. By day 10, workers at Kane Industries factories in 3 countries were speaking publicly about unsafe conditions, unpaid overtime, and environmental violations. Photos of contaminated water supplies and employees working without proper safety equipment flooded social media. Adrian's carefully crafted image as an innovative, responsible CEO began cracking like old paint. The beauty of it was that everything was completely legal and factual. I wasn't making anything up or sabotaging his business. I was simply making sure the truth saw daylight. Every revelation was backed by documentation, verified by multiple sources, and presented through proper journalistic channels. Adrian had built his empire on secrets and silence, but secrets have a way of wanting to be told. By day 20, federal investigators were asking questions about labor law violations and environmental crimes. His board was in emergency meetings, trying to control the damage while distancing themselves from practices they had enthusiastically supported when profits were high. The same people who had laughed at racist jokes were now claiming they had always been concerned about company culture. Day 30 arrived with the kind of poetic justice that makes you believe the universe has a sense of humor. I was getting ready for work when my phone rang at 6 a.m. Adrian's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment, I almost didn't answer. but curiosity won out. Maya. His voice was broken, desperate in a way I'd never heard before. Please, I need to see you. Everything is falling apart. There was genuine panic there, the sound of a man watching his world collapse in real time. The federal investigation had expanded into criminal charges. His stock had lost 60% of its value. 3 board members had resigned overnight, and Victoria's family had quietly called off the engagement, citing irreconcilable differences. When I agreed to meet him, it wasn't out of sympathy. I needed to see the end of this story with my own eyes. We met at the same coffee shop where it all began, and the difference was staggering. Gone was the confident billionaire who had swept me off my feet. In his place sat a man who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, his eyes red and hollow. "I know it was you," he said quietly, staring into his untouched coffee. "The timing, the specific details. Only you could have known all of this." I didn't deny it. There was no point in pretending anymore. "Why?" he asked, and for the first time since I'd known him, his voice cracked. "Was I really that terrible to you?" That's when I saw them. Actual tears running down the face of a man who had never shown weakness to anyone. Here was Adrian Kane, reduced to begging in a coffee shop, asking the woman he'd discarded for mercy he'd never shown anyone else. "You made me feel worthless," I told him simply, "like I was nothing more than your secret entertainment. Did you really think I'd just disappear and pretend none of this happened?" 6 months later, I'm sitting in my new office on the 42nd floor of Goldman Sachs, where I landed a senior analyst position after 3 different firms tried to recruit me. Turns out, taking down a corrupt billionaire with nothing but truth and determination looks pretty impressive on a resume. My student loans are gone, paid off with my signing bonus, and I'm working on cases that actually matter, helping ethical companies grow while exposing the ones that exploit people for profit. Adrian's empire didn't just crumble, it became a cautionary tale taught in business schools. Kane Industries filed for bankruptcy, but not before paying out settlements to every worker who had been exploited over the years. The federal investigation led to criminal charges that landed Adrian in minimum security prison for 18 months. His assets were frozen, his properties sold off to pay fines and restitution. But the real victory wasn't watching him fall. It was watching the workers rise. The factories that had operated under dangerous conditions were shut down until they met safety standards. Environmental cleanup began at contaminated sites. A whistleblower protection fund was established in my name, helping other people come forward about corporate abuse. Sometimes I think about that conversation in the coffee shop, about the tears on his face, when he realized that the woman he'd underestimated had been his downfall all along. He taught me something valuable about power. It's not about money or status or who you know. Real power comes from refusing to be silenced, from standing up when everyone expects you to sit down, from turning your pain into purpose. The richest man in Chicago learned the hard way that love isn't something you can buy, control, or discard without consequences. And I learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply telling the truth. If this story inspired you to never let anyone underestimate your worth, smash that like button and share this video. Drop a comment telling me about a time you turned the tables on someone who underestimated you. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about people who refuse to stay silent. Remember, your voice is your power. Use it.